same page, Daf Hey Amud Aleph 5a, and we are trying to figure out how big the kapeiros was. How tall was the kapeiros? The kapeiros was the board that covered the ark, the arain. There was a board that covered the ark of testimony, which was the ark that held the tablets, Torah, and the ark. The Gemara is telling us altogether was 10 handbreadths, but we really only know about the ark itself that it was 9 handbreadths, and we don't know clearly that the covering of the ark was another handbreadth. We don't know that. The Gemara is trying to prove it. So the Gemara that it was in the midst of telling us that we're going to learn it from the fact that the kapeiros. We're going to learn that the kapeiros is 1 tefach from the fact that the mesgeres is a tefach. The kapeiros is the tablet, the board on top of the ark, and the mesgeres is some type of a border around the table. And so the Gemara says the mesgeres we know was a tefach, so it makes sense that the board on top of the ark, that it doesn't say a measure, probably the same measure as one of the smallest, as the smallest vessel. And the mesgeres, the Gemara is saying, is one of the vessels of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So the kapeiros was probably the same size, maybe bigger, like a big utensil of the tabernacle. The Gemara says you can't assume that the kapeiros is bigger just because some vessels are bigger. You can only assume, if you want to assume something, you can only assume the least of the vessels, that this will be at least as big as the least of the vessels. But you can't go and say, oh, it's probably as big as the biggest. There's no source for such a thing. But to say it's the least, the size of the least, that would logical. That it sits is the headband of the Kohen Gadol that said on it Kodesh Hashem. Maybe that, which was only 2 finger breadths, maybe that would be the size of the kapeiros, which would make it smaller than a tefach, than a handbreadth that we're assuming, and it would mess up our calculation. And the Gemara said that the headband is really a tachshid. It's really an ornament, a garment. It's not you wouldn't call it a utensil. So we can't learn the kapeiros, which is a utensil, from the you can't learn the kapeiros, which is a utensil, from the tzitz. Rather, we're going to learn it from the mesgeres, because again, the tzitz is only a garment. It's not really not really something you could learn it from. Okay, so the Gemara that we're up to is the Nelef Mizer. The Nelef Mizer we should learn from the Zer. And that is on page 5a, towards the bottom. It is 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. Give me 1 second here. Okay. 6 lines up from the bottom of page 5a. V'neilaf mizer, let us learn from the zer. What is the zer? The Gemara says the zer was a small little decoration above the table. Again, the table had a maskeres. It had this border around it, but also had a little deck. I don't know what you would call it even. Decoration. Some type of decoration above the top of the table, and that's called the zer. And the size of it is only a mashahu. It's only a tiny size. It's not a finger breadth. It's not a hand breadth. It's not,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Here it calls it a crown.
Okay, but how big of a crown? It basically means the same thing as a tiny decoration. You could call it a crown above the. You could call it a crown, but the Gemara says it's a mashu. It's only the size of a drop. You know what I mean? It's a tiny size, so it's
on the debate from 4 days ago today. Yeah. So about the last 3 years, in the middle of what he was, he made this decision.
Okay. So let's continue. So it says that the V'neilaf mizer, let's learn from the zer of the which the shulchan, the table, had a zer, and the truth of the matter is some of the other utensils also had a zer. So really, there's a few utensils that had a zer, but the Amar Mar master said zer, the size of this zer, mashahu, is only a mashahu, tiny amount, a dot, drop. So the Gemara says, if so, that would mean that the kapeiros was very thin. It would have been a very thin board on top of the ark, and ultimately you will not have your calculation of 10 hand breadths. Instead, it'll be 9 hand breadths plus a little a fraction. So the Gemara answers, done in kli me kli, vein done in kli me hechsher kli. We're going to try to figure out the kapeiros, which is a utensil. It's an accessory. It's an item. It's a utensil for the Mishkan. We're going to learn it from another kli, another item that would be called a kli, a vessel, a utensil. And that would be like the maskeres of the table, the border. But ve'im done in kli me hechsher kli. But we're not going to learn a vessel from something that's only a garment, and or something that's only a beautifier. And here the zer is meant for beautifying purposes. So it's only a hechsher for the kli. So it makes it nicer, kasheves hakelim, to decorate the vessel. So it's used as it's a decoration. So the Gemara says, "Ihachi maskeres nami hechsher kli." So the same thing the Gemara says is the maskeres. You want to learn from the maskeres, the border. That's also only really a decoration to beautify the table. So the Gemara answers no. We are following the view that that the maskeres, the border, was not above it for decoration. It was below it, and it filled a role of being part of it rather than just above it as a decoration. So again, there's an argument exactly how the table of the tabernacle looked. According to one opinion, the tabernacle had a border above the table, and the tabernacle had a border above the table. According to the other opinion, it had a border below the board of the table. Below that board, there was like a border around it. So we're following the view that the maskeres was below it, and therefore we could say that if you learn from the maskeres, good, because the maskeres was a necessary part of the shulchan, of the table. But we're not going to learn from the zer, because the zer was not a necessary part of the table. It was a decoration part. It wasn't necessary for the The table itself was just more of a decoration. So the Gemara says, this is good if you follow that view that the Meskeres is below. But according to the other view that it was above it, it's a decoration. So Michael Lemmer, what are you going to say? This is only a decoration for the vessel. It's not part of the main part of the vessel. It's a decoration. So it comes out. So it comes out that this is only a Hafshir Kli. So it comes out that if we're going to learn from the Meskeres, we should instead learn from the Zer. And then you don't have your whole calculation is wrong, because the whole calculation was based on learning from the smallest of the Mishkan items. And here we have an item in the Mishkan that was really small. It was only a mashahu. A mashahu the Gemara uses when it means like a drop, the tiniest part, tiniest amount. So the Gemara says, Ella, rather, we're going to have to come up with a new way of understanding this. Danin davar shnitna v'Torah. We learn from something that the Torah gave a midah, a measure. Davar, from a thing, shnitna v'Torah midah, that the Torah gives a measure. But we can't learn from the tzitz and the zer. The Torah doesn't give a measure for the tzitz or for the zer. We, as the rabbis, understood what it is. Possibly even a halacha l'moshe Sinai. They have an understanding of how big the zer is supposed to be. That this decoration above the above these items in the tabernacle. How big tzitz is supposed to be. The forehead, and we know what it's supposed to be. That the tzitz is supposed to be 2 finger breadths. There is a mashahu. So that we know, but it doesn't say it clearly in the Torah. Therefore, the Gemara says we're going to learn the size of the kapiras from something that says clearly, not something that the Torah doesn't spell out clearly how big it is. So that's the first answer. And so we have, according to that calculation, we're going to learn it from the Meskeres. Because the Meskeres, it clearly says, toifach, that it was the size of a handbreadth. So therefore, we'll learn from the Meskeres, everything goes good. 10 handbreadths tall is the tabernacle. And we learn from there that that's the size of a domain. And anything lower than 10 handbreadths would be too low, would not be like a separate domain. Now comes the next piece of Gemara, the next answer. And the next, Rav Huna Amar Mehacha. Rav Huna says you learn it from here. What does it mean here? From where it talks about the law of sprinkling the blood on Yom Kippur. That the Kohen Gadol would take from the blood of the bull, and he would sprinkle it with his finger. Excuse me. And this is when the Kohen Gadol would do the 7 and 1, the one achas l'maylo v'sheva l'mata, he would sprinkle 1 above and 7 below, and he would say achas v'achas. That's what we say in the shul on Yom Kippur. We talk about this sprinkling of the blood of the bull. So the Gemara tells us that, what does it say over there? Al Penea Kapedas Kedma, that he would sprinkle this blood on the face of the Kapedas, of this Kapedas, this board that's on the ark, Kedma towards the east. So we would spray it towards the east. In other words, he would shech the bull, receive the blood, give the blood to someone else to mix, so it wouldn't harden. Then he would enter the Kodesh Kodashim, bring the potatoes, then he'd come back, bring the incense, and take the blood of the par of the bull, and he would enter the Holy of Holies, and to sprinkle the blood from the sprinkle from the blood to the in between the Badei Ha'arain Tzad Mizrach towards the east. He would sprinkle the blood between the poles that the ark was held up by, was carried by, and he would do 8 sprinkles. So the Gemara says that, what does it mean? The face of the kapayris. He would sprinkle it towards the face. So me being panim pachas mitefach. A face is never a face less than a tefach. A tefach is the smallest size of a human head, handbreadth. So therefore, if it says al pnei kapayris, we know that the kapayris was the size of a handbreadth because he uses the word pnei. Now the Gemara says, but the ema
Me too. A lot of things are making me sick. So I need to sign off. So.
Okay. So the ema ka'ape. Let's actually turn the page now. 5b, the bar yuchni. Let's say that it's like the face of a bar yuchni, which is a large, very large bird, and it's much bigger than a handbreadth, and maybe that's how big the board on top of the ark had to be. The Gemara says no, because if you could learn that it's the face of a human, or you could learn it's the face of this huge bird, you're going to much faster learn the smaller amount than the larger amount, because as the Gemara said already, tafasta meruba loy tafasta. If you grab a little, tafasta meruba loy tafasta. If you grab too much, you didn't grab anything. It wasn't. If you grab too much, you don't get it. Loy tafasta. Tafasta muad. But if you grab a little tafasta, then you grabbed it. Which means if you ask for too much, you get nothing. If you want to try to learn that it has to be that huge size, not necessarily so. But if you want to say that it has to be the size of the smallest vessel, utensil, so then it would that would make sense. So we're going to assume that the face, talking about the face of the size of a tefach. Ema kapi the Gemara says, oh, it's because you can't grab too much. What about maybe it's the size of a face of a small bird, which is that's very small. It's iparta. Because bar yuchni is a large bird. Siparta is a regular bird. But it says dezuta, that's small. Zuter tuva, very small. So maybe that's the size of the face that we're talking about. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, Rav Huna, Rav Huna learned a Seira Shava, which means he found the word in one place, same word in another place. And when we have a tradition that we're supposed to learn one from the other, so we say that the laws that you have in one place apply in the other place, because it mentions the same word, and the rabbis have a tradition that we're supposed to learn something from the two things that it talks about. So therefore, the Gemara says, Pnei Gomer, well, we learn a Gzeir Shava about Pnei, that the Ksiv Hacha al Pnei HaKapiros here, regarding the Kapiros, it says al Pnei HaKapiros, it says that al Pnei HaKapiros, facing the of the Kapiros, to the face of the sprinkle it to the face of the Kapiros. Ksiv Hasaman, it says over there, Meis Pnei Yitzchok, that the face of Yitzchok, that he went out when Jacob left from from before the face of Jacob, Isaac, his father. So Jacob left his father, and then Esau came to get the blessings, and he is too late. So that story, it says Pnei. So you see, so the Gemara says there's a Gzeir Shava, and it says the word here Pnei, and it says the word there Pnei. So we learned that it must be Pnei, must be the size of a handbreadth, because the smallest human head is the size of a handbreadth. And so the Gemara says, but Pnei look Bipanim Shalmaila. Maybe when it says Pnei, it means the face of above, and meaning they're like angels. As it says, like the face of Elokim. So you have a Gzeir Shava Pnei, maybe it should be learned from the other Pnei that it says in regarding the when Yaakov gave a gift to Esau. So it says Pnei Kirois Pnei Elokim Batertzeni that seeing you, Jacob said, is like seeing the face of Hashem, and Batertzeni, and he appreciated, God appreciated me. Now, or he acknowledged and was Batertzeni. He was appeased. Now the point is that maybe it means the face of an angel, and the angel we assume is bigger than the smallest human face. But it says, yeah, it could be both. But you grab too much, you don't grab. But if you grab a little, that would work. And therefore, we can't get the higher amount. We have to get the smaller, which would be the face of a human, not of an angel. So the Gemara says, "V'neilach mikruv." Why don't we learn from a kruv that by the kruvim, the cherubs, that it says the siv says by the cherubs of kruvim that they should face the kapiras. It uses the word penei. They will towards the kapiras should be the face of the cherubs. So we see it says the face, and we're assuming that the cherubs were less than a handbreadth, and that would mess up our calculation if this is true, that we should learn from the cherubs. So the Gemara says, and the Gemara explains, the Gemara answers this question by saying, we have a tradition that the face of the cherubs are not less than the size of a handbreadth.
So I think it's a transit.
Rav Huna Nami. What?
Please.
Rav Huna Nami. Rav Huna Nami. Mehacha Gomer. Rav Huna also, when he said that you learn from the Pnei, actually meant that he said you learn from the face. Rav Huna said, what was Rav Huna's original understanding of punning? So the Gemara says, now that we see that the Kruvim, the cherubs, were also a tefach, it would make sense that that's probably what Rav Huna meant. Okay, so it would make sense that that's what Rav Huna meant also, that he was talking about the Kruvim and not the face of a human. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Umay kruv," and what is, once we're mentioning about the kruv, the Gemara asks, so what is the form of the kruv, the cherub? Amar Rabbi Avo Karabyo. Kruv is, Rabbi Avo says, it's Karabyo. It's like the face of like a child. That's what the word kruv. That's what the word kruv seemingly means, from the word of Rabbi. Okay, so the Gemara says that Shekain Bavel was in Bavel. Kairin Leyanuka Rabia. In Bavel, they would call a child Rabia. Now the Gemara says, Amar Le Abaye Elameyato. Abaye says, Kruv is the face of a child. What does it mean? Dichsiv, Elameyato. The Gemara says, Elameyato. If so, according to your
Rabbi, we lost you. Your voice is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
How about now? Yeah, now it's good. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So so the Gemara says that the Gemara says Elamiata. So Abaye says to Rebbe Avo, if so, that you're saying the kruv is really the face of a child. So the Gemara says, by dichsiv Elamiata dichsiv nei ha'echad nei hakruv nei hasheni bnei adam. It says the face of one of them is the face of a kruv. The face of it's talking about the Merkava, the chariot that Ezekiel saw in his vision of Nevuah, of prophecy. And each kruv had 4 faces on it. Each cherub had four faces. And what was on these 4 faces? What were the 4 faces? So one of them was Pnei Echad Pnei Kruv. The third one was the face of a man, and the second one was the face of a man. The third one was a lion, and the fourth one was a eagle. Right. So the Gemara asks, if you're telling me that the face of a kruv is the face of a child, so that's Pnei Adam. That means 2 of them are the same. You're saying Pnei Kruv and Pnei Adam. That's the same thing. They're both humans. So the Gemara says, Hainu Kruv, Hainu Adam. According to you, if you want to tell me that kruv is like a child, that's the same as that means in the vision of Ezekiel. It shouldn't have said one of them was kruv and the other one was Adam. Obviously, you see from there that they're 2 separate things. Gemara says no, they're the same thing, except that one is big and one is small. Gemara says Abi Rabavi. The Apis, which is big face, and there's a small face. So when I was the human, the Adam was a big face, and the other one was a small, was like a child, like a baby. Okay, the Gemara continues. It says that so basically, so we've concluded this understanding that the way we know that the kapiris, everything altogether was 10 hand breaths, was because the kapiris is really 1 hand breath, and it's basically learned from the fact that it says Pnei, and we learn in Gzeir Shava that Pnei by the Kruvim, the Pnei Kapiris Kedma. So we see that the Kapiris, if the Pnei Kruvim was the Kruv was a tefach, so also the Kapiris was also a tefach, a hand breath, and that was the Gemara's understanding. The Gemara's understanding of Rav Huna. Okay. Now, and the Gemara explained also that a Kruv is just happened while we're talking about Kruv, and the Gemara gave this insight of what is a Kruv. It's a child, and that's what the Kruv would look like. Okay. The Gemara now continues. It says that Mimai dechalala asara bar mischacha. How do we know that the hollow of the sukkah is 10? And it excludes the stuff. I would say, included that the domain, it has to be a domain. A domain is 10 hand breaths, fine. So with the schach, it could be 10. That should be good enough. With the schach, it's 10 hand breaths. So my answer is Ella, rather. How do we know that it needs to be 10? We learn the Beisoy Lamim. We learn from the Beis HaMikdash that the Beis HaMikdash, which is called the Beis Lamim, and you're going to learn from there that the size of a sukkah has to be the hollow of the sukkah has to be 10 hand breadths, just the hollow without the sukkah. How do we learn from the Beis HaMikdash? Because it says the house that Shlomo HaMelech built for Hashem, Shisha Mama Orka was 60 amos. Its length 60 cubits. Yes, from Rachba 20 amos. Its width Ushleisha Mama Kemasi was 30 amos, 30 cubits high. It means that it's 3 times bigger than the tabernacle. Tabernacle was only 10 amos, 10 cubits height. Siv, and it says regarding the Kruvim in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kruvim, the ones that were standing on the floor Beis Hamikdash. These kruvim, it says one of them, the kaima, the height of it was eser ba'ama, was 10 amos high. So the Tanya, and we learned in a brayso, mamatzina beis elamim kruvim b'shlish habayis einaimdim, just like in the Beis Hamikdash. We know that the kruvim, the cherubs, were 10 amos, which is a third of the height of the entire Beis Hamikdash height. Was 10 from 30 is 1/3. So mamatzino, just like we find the Beis Elamim, kruvim b'shlish habayis einaimdim, they're standing in a third of the size of the bayis of Beis Hamikdash. So Mishkan Nami, Mishkan also kruvim b'shlish habayis einaimdim. The kruvim also stood at a third of the height of the Mishkan. Now, what would that mean? Mishkan Kamahavi, how tall was the Mishkan? Eser amos, 10 amos tall, 10 cubits. As it says, Eser amos erech hakoresh. The beams that were vertically, the walls, they were vertical wall beams. These beams were 10 cubits. That was the length of these beams. Kama havalahu, how much does that equal? How many handbreadths? Shisin pushchi, that's 60 handbreadths. Because every amma is 6. So if the ammas are 6, so then if you have 10 ammas, you have 60 handbreadths. And lase kamahavi, how much would a third of it be? A third would be 20. 20 from 60 would be a third. So esrim pushchi, that would be 20. So what does this mean? That the height of the cherubs would end at 20 handbreadths tall. Now, dal, you have to remove from this calculation, since we don't really know how big the cherub is itself, because the cherub is on top of the ark. So this calculation says where the cherub is in the room, that it's the height of the 20 handbreadths, the top of it, but we don't really know where the bottom starts, because the bottom starts it doesn't start on the floor, it starts midway above the ark and above the board on top of the ark. So dal asara, the oren mekaberes. Now we got to remove 10 handbreadths for the ark and the kapiris, the board on top of the ark. So we've calculated already that that's 10. Now we remove those 10, and we'll see that the kapiris, the kruvim, we'll see that the kruvim, the cherubs, are a little different than we thought. Pashu lahu asara, we got 10 handbreadths for the cherubs for their height. Uksiv, and it says, V'hayu akruvim parsei chanafayim lamayla. The cherubs were spreading their wings above, hovering or being a tent with their wings over the kapiras, the board of the ark, board on top of the ark. So the kruvim spread their wings. So the Gemara says, "Harya Rachmana Slacha L'mayla Me'asara." The Torah calls that they are mesachech, they are hovering over. It's using the word schach above a halal, above a hollow of 10, because the idea over here is that since the kruvim reached a height of 20 handbreadths, and we know that there were 10 handbreadths that were the ark in the Kapairas was 10. So basically, these kruvim are 10 handbreadths, and their wings would be spread above on the Kapairas, over the Kapairas. So if their wings are spread over the Kapairas, it would mean that there has to be a hollow of 10. So the way the Gemara is understanding it is that the wings were above the head of the kruvim, and therefore the head of the kruvim is exactly at 20 handbreadths, and the wings are above that. So if the wings are above that, and it uses the word schach, it means that there's a hollow. That, and I was imagine that this is the kruv, and now I have my hand is above my head, and my hand is 10 handbreadths from my head basically down to my feet. So it was, according to that, it's that the wing is above 10 handbreadths. That's the understanding. The Gemara asks, who says that the wings are above?
So we're going to get the point.
Maybe they are in the maybe they are even with the head, equal with the head, next to the head. So the Gemara says,
You want to take your yarmulke or you want to leave it in the car?
Yaakov says,
You want to take your yarmulke?
First say Nafayim Lamaila means that they were above the head. So it comes out that there is a hollow of 10 handbreadths. That would be a way of understanding that the sukkah needs to be 10 handbreadths. So the ema de medali de midlay tuva, maybe they are very high above it, and maybe it needs to be bigger than 10. So the Gemara says miksiv lamaila. Does it say above? It just says it was above their heads. So it means it's right there, right above it. So the Gemara answers. The Gemara says that there's a little problem here. That is that Hanicha, this all fits very good. The Reb Meir, according to Reb Meir, the Amar that says Kol Ha'amos, all the cubits in the Mishkan, that they were Hayu Beinoinios, they were intermediate handbreadths, which means they were the size, they were intermediate cubits that equaled 6 handbreadths, and it's called a Amma Baininus. Now, if you calculate that way, so the ark was 9 handbreadths tall, the Kapairas was 1 handbreadth, and that would be an Amma V'chitzi, an Amma and a half. It would be an Amma and a half, 9 would be an Amma and a half, plus the Kapairas on top would be 10 handbreadths. But however, not everyone agrees with that. Elo Rebbe Yehuda, according to Rebbe Yehuda, the Amar that says Amma Shel Binyan, the Amma of the Mishkan's building is truly is 6 tefachim. Each Amma, each cubit is 6 tefachim. However, Mishal Kalim, but the utensils of the tabernacle, the items in the tabernacle, that had a different calculation. It's not, a cubit is not 6 handbreadths, it's 5. Tamisha, the cubits of the items are only 5 handbreadth cubits. So according to that calculation, Ma'ikol Meimar, it's going to mess up our whole calculation, because it comes out that instead of being the ark itself was 9 handbreadths, because 6 handbreadths is a cubit, and it's a cubit and a half, it would be 9. Now we're saying cubit is 5, so a cubit and a half would be 7.5 hand breadths. If it's a cubit and a half, it would equal 7.5 hand breadths, and that would mess up our entire calculation, because what that would mean would be that a schach would be kosher above 7.5 hand breadths, not 10. So Michael, so what the Gemara says, Michael Amemar. So how could we explain this? Aron v'kaperes. How could we explain Michael Amemar? Aron v'kaperes kama havalu. How much will be the calculation of the ark and then the kaperes on top of it? Tamanya upalga. It's going to be altogether 8.5. I said 7.5. Why does it say 8.5 here? Because we're adding the kaperes, which was the tefach we've proven. So since the kaperes is a tefach, is a hand breadth, and this is plus the 7.5 that the ark itself was, that would be 8.5. So pashalu chadsrei palga. So you're left with up to 20. If you're going to calculate up to 20 hand breadths, so you're going to have much more than what we calculated before. Instead of 10, you're going to have 11.5. Chadsrei is 11. Upalga and a half are hand breadths that are have a schach on top of it. So meaning the wings of the cherubs would be on top of 11.5 hand breadths, not on 10. So the Gemara says, Ema Sukkah ad havi chadsrei upalga. According to this, maybe you're going to say that the sukkah needs to be the minimum size sukkah is 11.5. Maybe you're going to say it needs to be 11.5. So the Gemara says, Ella Rabbi Yehuda hilchos gemiri law. So it must be according to Rabbi Yehuda. You have to say that it's a halacha l'maisha misinai, and it's learned that we have a Masorah that the minimum size of a sukkah is 10 hand breadths, and that's basically the way we're gonna, much easier than all the other calculations. It's halacha l'maisha misinai. That's it. It's learned a tradition we have. Dam Rav Chi Bar Ashi Yam Rav. As Rav Chi Bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, shiurin, the measurements of the Torah, tezayis, and which applies to so many laws, and the size of a kaiseves, which is a date regarding Yom Kippur, chatzitzin, the law of chatzitzin regarding the mikvah, that anything that is interposing between the body and the water, it's the laws of chatzitza, and machitzin, the laws of a divider, the laws of these laws, which we're now saying mechitzin would include the law, the rule of a sukkah, and other laws of mechitza, halacha l'maisha misinai. They are all learned from halacha l'maisha misinai. Now the Gemara says shiurin d'oraisa nenu. Aren't the shiurim, the measurements like the zayis and all those measurements, aren't they all from the Torah? The Siv eretz chitu sa'ira, it says a land of chita, of wheat, and sa'ira barley, geffen, grapes, te'ina, and figs, re'ima, and pomegranates, eretz shemen, the land of olives that give oil, udvash, and dates that give honey. So Rab Chanan says, "Kol pasuk the shiurim namar." This whole pasuk is going to teach us laws about the shiurim. So we see that the measurements of the Torah are like the law of kazayas we see here, or Kaiseves, or the date, or the other laws. They're all involved. We will learn them from this from the Torah. So it's not a halacha l'maisha misinai. It's not a tradition. It's an actual law. So the Gemara says. The Gemara continues. It gives us examples. All the examples. Chita. What do we learn from chita? The measurement of a wheat kernel. It's for the base hamanuk. The measurement of wheat is it's not a wheat kernel.
measurement of wheat. What's the size of what is it applicable for? So it's regarding Beis Hamanuga, a house that has taras. That if a person comes into that house, he's tamei, and the understanding is that his clothes will only become tamei, impure, and need to go to mikvah. His clothes will have to go into the mikvah only if it waited a certain measurement of time, a certain amount of time. And how much time it has to do with wheat. Did not, because we learned in the mission. A person who enters this house that has taras, and he's carrying clothing, he's not wearing it. The sandal and he's holding his sandal in his ring. So who in that case the tummy immediate. But Hayalavush, now we turn to page 6a. Hayalavush, Caleb, if he's wearing the clothing, the sandal beraglav and sandals are on his feet, then the tavoisav that's ba'osav, and his ring is on his finger. So then he's wearing clothing, so it has a different law of regarding the tumah. In other words, when does it become tamei? Not right when it enters. Who tamei miyad? The person is impure right away. He enters, he's impure. Even if he didn't wait there, in and out, he's tamei. Because he came to the house. It says havala bias. You come to the house, you're tamei. But vehain, but the items that he's wearing, the garments that he's wearing, the sandals, the rings, the garments. So vehain tahirin, they're tahar ad sheyisha b'chadei achilas pras. Only until he waits in the house a certain amount of time. What is that amount of time? Did I lose everyone? Are you with me? You with me? Okay. I'm sorry, I don't see if you have your hands up. So if anyone wants to, just feel free to interrupt. I'm on my phone and can't really see things. Okay. So in such a case that he waits there, what's the amount of time he has to wait there that it'll make his garments to become tummy that he's wearing, not the garments he's holding. The garments he's wearing will become tummy only after he waits there. The amount of time it takes to eat a half a loaf. The half a loaf is considered a meal, one meal. And how much is, what type of loaf? So it's a loaf of bread that's made from wheat. Now, how do we know this whole law? Because it says, Hashoichev babayis, it says, a person who lies down in the house, then he has to wash his garments. And then it says the person who eats in the house has to wash his garments. So the Gemara understands that you don't have to actually eat there, but you wait there the amount of time that it would take to eat a meal, which is a half a loaf. And the Gemara understands it to be that would be the size of specifically of wheat bread, and not other breads. That there's a difference in time, how long it takes to eat different breads. And specifically, so the Gemara says and explains, paschitin v'loi pasa oirin, wheat bread and not barley bread. Wheat bread is faster, it takes less time to eat it, and barley bread is longer. So when the Torah says eretz chitu u'sa'ira, when it says this pasuk about the land, the 7 species that Eretz Yisrael, Israel, is blessed with. So it mentions chitim to tell you that when you measure that, the amount of time they have to stay in this house in order to become tamei in the house of the leper house, that the house has leprosy. So it's specifically the amount of time of chitim, which is shorter than the amount of time for sa'irim, for bread, or half a loaf of barley bread. Okay, then the Gemara says mesa, and he has to eat it while he's reclining. And the way he normally eats, and in other words, in concentrating on eating and not like doing other things at the same time, and so on. But oichel, the lifton, and he eats it also with some type of a dip. That he's not just eating the bread. So in other words, the calculation of time is this half a loaf of wheat bread that he's eating while he's concentrating on eating, and he's reclining also, in other words, and he's not walking around, he's walking and leaving. Specifically Mesa, he's sitting down and eating, reclining. And it's also that he's eating it and dipping it with a dip, or dip or something else that's eaten with bread. Now the Gemara continues and says Sa'ira. Why does it have to say Sa'ira? So the Gemara says Tanan, because we learned in a Mishnah that the Mishnah says Etzem. This has to do with the impurity also. We learned about the tumah of a corpse, that we learned that it says etzem, a bone is kisa'ira. An etzem is like the size of a sa'ira, that's the size of a barley kernel. Metame b'maga uvamasa. It will be metame. If there's a bone that's the size of a barley kernel, it'll be metame. It'll make other things tame if it touches them or if someone carries it. Right. Even if the person doesn't touch it. But it won't make the oil, if it's inside a tent, it won't make the other things in the tent tame. Right. Or if a person is standing above it and leaning over it, so he won't be tame if it's such a small thing. It needs to be a much larger measurement. Like it has to be the entire back of the spine, or the entire head, or the majority of the limbs of the person, and or the build of the person, and so on. So there's other measurements for that, but the size of the sa'ira barley applies for touching and for carrying. Now comes the next. Now comes the geffen. What about the vine? What do we learn? What's that measurement applicable for? So it says Kedei Revius Yayin LeNazir, that the Nazir is only obligated. He's only liable if he drinks the Revius of wine. Now, person accepts on himself, a Nazir is a person who accepts on himself a prohibition. He's not going to have grapes, or he's not going to take a haircut. He's not going to go into become impure with go into a cemetery. So the law of the vine is that he's not allowed to have anything from the grapevine, even grape juice, and even the skin, or the seeds inside. So it says that it says that the measurement is regarding a revius, not a kazayas. It's a quarter of a lug, a certain measurement of liquid, and not the size of a kazayas, the size of an olive. So how do you calculate this measurement? So the way it works is you put these seeds into a cup filled with wine until it spills over the amount of a revius, of this quarter of a lug, a certain measurement. And once it fills up enough of the cup that it causes so much to spill over, that would be the amount that a person would be responsible for if they ate these chartsanim, these seeds from the grapes. So the size of the seeds of the grapes would be the measurement of a revius, of a quarter of a lug. And we learn that from the fact that it says geffen, that you're supposed to measure with wine and not with water. That means that that you you spill over that amount of wine, which would take more to spill over than if it was filled with water and it would spill over. It wouldn't take as much seeds to cause it to spill over. So it's specifically geffen that we measure the amount with wine instead of with water. Okay, so that's why it says geffen. In te'ena that says fig. Why does it say? What do we learn? What halacha comes out from the fact that it says figs? So the Gemara says, because regarding the laws of Shabbos carrying, when you carry something outside in a place where there's no eruv, so you carry something on Shabbos from a private domain to a public domain, or from a public domain to a private domain, or if you carry it in a public domain, 4 cubits. So a person would be responsible only if they carry a certain amount of stuff. How much? It has to be the size of a gregeres, a fig. So te'enas gregeres like saw Shabbos to the regarding the liability of carrying on Shabbos. So regarding food items, it would be the measurement of a dried fig. Now, of course, each item has its thing, but food items, it goes by the fig. Okay. Now, remind a pomegranate, non, because we learned in a Mishnah that kol klei balabatim, every vessel of a regular householder, not a store, not a person selling vessels, but someone who's using it for their household use. So all vessels, shiuran, their measurement of having a hole that would make them tahor, would make them pure, meaning that their vessel is no longer considered a impure vessel because it broke and it got a hole that ruins its usage, and it no longer considered a vessel. So it has to have a hole the size of a remine of a pomegranate. But if it had a smaller hole, and it would still be considered a vessel, and you could still use it, and it's not going to become tahar, purified. And what happens in the olden days, if they had a vessel that had a smaller hole, they would use it for other things. Use it for let's say beans will fall through it, so they would put something bigger than beans in it, so on and so forth. But they would, but if it has a hole of a remine of a pomegranate, it's no use. If it has a little smaller than a pomegranate, you use it for pomegranates because the pomegranates won't fall through. Anyway, basically, this is the size of the remine is applicable for regarding the laws of Kalim about balabayas of a regular person, that if it has such a hole, it's going to become purified. Okay, we're going to stop here. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I think it would be very helpful if you look in Vayakhel, in the Parsha Vayakhel,
Yeah.
and you see that when the kaparos was made, there's no wood, there's no board. It's simply a sheet of gold that has been beaten. And in the commentary, it'll say how that's what miksha means. And that's why they don't give any depth to it. Even though the notes say everywhere that they...
No. It has to be a tefach.
That's what they say. It has to be a tefach. But it's just a piece of gold that is beaten. There's no wood. There's no board.
So you want to say the reason why it doesn't say a measurement is because it's just beaten, so there's no measurement to it. It depends on however much they beat it. But that's not true.
Gold is...
True. It has to be a tefach.
All the other vessels of the Aaron, it says he covered them, has a verb. He covered them with gold.
You're right that it
But not
says
this.
that by the others, but this one doesn't. But you can't learn differently than the Gemara. The Gemara says that it has to be a tefach.
I understand.
You have a
And
nice,
it says in
you
my
have a nice
Chumash
thought,
also,
but it's not.
says in my Chumash
What?
too. But you'll have to You have to
You
think
know what?
about it.
I must run. 1 second.
Okay,
I must
another
run, but
time, I would love to
but
discuss.
we'll talk. We'll talk about it. Yeah. Okay. Bye.